Hello, I'm Bruce Zimmerman, and this is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week. Now, we've had one heck of a lot of rain, and it has affected the plants in our garden. Now, earlier on when it was colder and there was a lot of rain, we got a little worried that, some plants would not like or respond well to the amount of moisture as opposed to the amount of oxygen in the soil. So in other words, the water was precluding oxygen in the soil, and as we all know, the good bacteria and of course all the roots are going to need oxygen as well as water and food. So it's a balance between the three, and of course we had too much moisture, causing an imbalance and leaching out either through gravitational water or to the air of a lot of fertilizer. And the fertilizer wasn't able to actually go and cling into the soil particles. Now, the result was that we had too much water, too little space in the soils. The soils actually compacted down, and of course leached out all the good food. And the good bacteria and other insects didn't exactly appreciate the soil. It pushed them up towards the top, and that's not a bad thing if the birds in your turf or your garden were able to reach them and get them and eat them. So there may be a little bit of an advantage to the excess moisture. Some plants, though, actually did respond, and you're getting excessive amounts of growth. Now, this growth is not what you would call turgid growth. This is long, soft, floppy growth, and the inner nodes are, of course, longer and farther apart. This means that your plant is getting longer shoots, and therefore space between the leaves is greater. Also, some plants have actually produced more leaves, and I'm looking at my metasequoias and saying they're producing excessive amounts of foliage, where my yellow magnolia is producing large leaves as opposed to the regular size that we get each year. So they're reacting slightly differently, but they're still reacting. The pink star magnolia is getting long inner nodes, and of course getting soft and floppy. It almost looks like a weeping type of bush as opposed to one with turgid branches, which is starting to develop the flowers for next year. So these can be left and left alone in many cases, but I think the pink star magnolia should actually be trimmed. The excess moisture on the metasequoia should be trimmed only to control size and direction of growth. We don't need to take a lot off, but it's a good idea. The yellow magnolia, well, let's be honest, it's just going to continue to grow anyways, so just leave it alone. But you're going to take any branches off that basically are growing in the wrong direction, or they're interfering with traffic flow, etc. So I would say you've got a little bit of work to do in the garden when it comes to trimming. And we can be trimmed now, but the longer you wait, the more you may spur some growth late in the season. And this is bad because the plant does not get to slow down for the winter and become more winter hardy. But also, it doesn't have time to develop a lot of the flower buds. So do not hesitate when it comes to doing some pruning. With your turf care, you know that normally at this time of year it's slowing down and we're having to water to keep our lawns decent and green and thick enough to compete against the weeds. But what I would recommend is that you do keep your lawn a little longer. It's important that they actually have a larger photosynthetic area in order to grow and thicken up, because in a lot of cases I'm seeing a lot of weeds as opposed to a lot of turf grass. And therefore, the weeds are having a better time because the grass is a little thinner. So I need that to be done. You can do a light fertilization as well. And it is so important that you keep it growing and healthy. So this means cutting it longer, probably 1.5 inches or more in length, taking off very little of the tips of the grass, and because you're mulching, okay, you're putting that back on, so you're going to need the warmth, you're going to need moisture, and you're going to need some fertilizer to help break it down into a usable form. Otherwise, you build thatch, and the thatch, of course, is a perfect place for bugs to find a home, to breed, but also it allows for poor grass growing too high, and it makes it susceptible to summer drought and winter cold. And that is a problem. So you want to do those few things. Make sure that you're getting at least 1 inch of moisture a week on your turf grass. And let's be honest, it's been pretty easy so far this spring. And even into early June and July, we're still receiving adequate amounts of moisture. Look for wasp nests. I'm starting to see a lot of wasps coming and developing the nests. These are usually like a paper wasp or a bald-faced wasp, etc. And you may not really want them where they develop. Like the bald-faced wasp, there is an argument that can be made that it's beneficial, where the yellow jackets or wasps are not. So what you can do is you can put up those fake wasp nests, which will of course preclude them from getting and building their nest in that part of the garden, but they will get to the outer edge of their effect and they will actually build a nest. So you're going to have to look at something within maybe 50 feet of the nest that you have got up there to scare them away. The artificial nest works, but let's just say you go around the corner and there's a perfect place for a wasp nest to grow just around the corner of your house, they will do it. So again, that could be a walkway from the front to the back, and you don't want to have to walk past all these wasps every time you go in or out. And of course, if you brush up against any of the plant material with the wasp in it, they're going to be coming out after you. So you may have to go after them with hornet and wasp spray, etc. And I would strongly recommend that you do a nice quiet walk in the morning. They will be there. They'll all be in the nest as well during cold weather, which we're not going to have, but also in the rain. They seldom come out. They're sort of more in the nest than out. So if you are raining and you want to do your work and you don't mind getting cold and wet out there, then you can go looking then. But otherwise, you get anywhere near and disturb any of the nests or the plant material that the nests are in at any time of the day or night, you will get some wasps coming after you. Okay? So be careful with that. I'm getting a lot of seedlings in my garden, and so you're going to have to go looking for those. And some are you're going to select, some are you going to encourage, some are you're not going to. But you can do that. We should talk a little bit more about that as well. But I think we should talk a little bit about daylilies. Daylilies are edible, but tiger lilies and the other lilies are not. So the flowers are edible, but you're going to have to check them. You're going to have to remove any pollen because you're probably allergic to the pollen. You're going to have to wash them. You're going to have to not spray them with anything. And you may or may not like the taste. So you may want to pick and choose, and some people will like it, some people won't. And very often the heel of each petal is a different color. It's usually white, and it's usually bitter. So you may want to remove that part. But you're going to have to check and see if you really want to do this. But you only take the fresh, of course, most perfect flowers. And you may not want to take them out of your garden, but that's what you would be using for salads, etc. Squash blossoms, another thing that a lot of people will do. They'll fritter them, they'll put them in a batter, they'll stuff them with like a cream cheese mixture. Again, wash, pick in early morning when they're turgid and open. You want to make sure that all the pollen and the stamens are removed, and it will work. And keep them cool. It has to be done quickly and very shortly to the eaten or put into some type of container in the fridge in order to keep them nice until you're ready to eat, which should be almost immediately. You can try all these things, but be aware, never eat alone, and be very careful, because some people don't react well to them, okay? And there is no rules. You don't see the squash blossoms very often in a grocery store or any other flowering material, because nobody really knows, and there's such variation in people's desires, likes, tastes, etc., or susceptibilities to pollen. So that's very important that you go and do that. Now, daffodils and tulips. The late tulips are finished, but there's a few that are still up and now ready to be removed. Now, how do you know when a tulip is ready to be removed? Well, first of all the leaves and the stem, the flower stem, is brown. They may be laying on the ground, they may not. And you want to pull and twist, and they should come off very easily, right out of the ground, and you'll know that that bulb has made all the food for next year and going to give you the best flowers. So that's important. Daffodils, on the other hand, have a tendency to multiply if they're not planted very deeply. And they will get smaller and smaller and fewer flowers until you go in and renovate. You won't renovate until the fall, usually sometime in September. This will give you warm soil to lift and separate them out and replant them. Some of them will be so small, the bulbs, that you may want to line them out in a garden, like a vegetable garden or a flower garden, somewhere in the back, and just grow them on for a couple of years until they size up. Others you're just going to divide up and give a little more room and replant. Make sure that you use a little bit of, let's say, holland bulb food or a very slow release food that can go down the bottom of the hole when you're planting your daffodil with a layer of soil over top. And you want most of your daffodils down at least 8 inches, and you want them about 6 to 8 inches apart. This will give you the best and longest lasting clump of daffodils. And it'll take a little time, and they will come up and they will do everything. Otherwise, if they're fine, you wait until the leaves are completely brown and laying down on the ground. And then you can sweep your hand along and actually grab them and pull and pick them up. That's when you know you've done a good job and they're all done. Now there will be a lot of them that'll have mixed both green and brown in there. So what you want to do is lift the green and often go after the brown. And they're usually underneath the green. So you want to take out as much as you can. Leave the green for as long as possible in order to make sure that the plant goes and actually makes the amount of food, because those green ones are usually some of the small ones that aren't going to flower unless you do, or they're going to flower in coming years. So those are the regenerated plants and bulbs that you want to look after. The species tulips usually just look after themselves. It's one of the reasons why I love the little species. Animals don't really bother them, and they don't like them that much, so they leave them alone. So if you want to, and you've got a small area that needs to be done, try species tulips, and I think you'll really enjoy them in your garden. They're very different and easy to grow. I'm Bruce Zimmerman. This is the Open Line Garden Show podcast for this week.